Is it on? Yes. Can you hear me? Ready when you tell me we should start. Well, okay, right. We're on time. It's wonderful because everyone is on time, and I might be French, so as you know, being on time is not a priority. But I represent a German organization, and for us, it still matters. I don't know. Europeans like to talk about values, and I think being on time should be at least one of those. I'm extremely privileged to be back in Bled. It's my 5th time. I'm really grateful that the wonderful team of Peter Geerk and Tanja Fayon have kept the folly of keeping inviting me, and those stages are already such a treat every year. We don't just reflect on the most pressing geopolitical developments, we also try to navigate and make sense of what we think is madness, but there's no such thing as madness in geopolitics. There's just a rationality that waits to be uncovered. I don't think I need to spend so much time on the background, first of all, because we only have 75 minutes and there's a full audience, so I'd like to spend as much time as possible with you interacting with our wonderful panelists. And the second, because I'm so privileged to have, I mean it, an outstanding panel. We have senior representatives from China, India, Azerbaijan, Europe, both continental and non-continental. And I think it's not so common when one talks about the state of geopolitics. I must apologize to our speakers because I call the panel Shaken Not Stirred. Most of you will have understood it's a reference to James Bond, but I forgot to bring my vodka and martini, so we'll have to do without. But I'm sure that the bar over there will be generous with us. We speak now and gather as President Xi is welcoming dozens of heads of state and government to celebrate tomorrow the 80th anniversary of China's victory over Japan and the victory of the Allied forces on fascism. And everyone here has followed the impressive Tianjin summit of the Shanghai Organization yesterday and 2 days ago. I think this is met with an interesting set of comments in at least the European press, and we'll have time to delve into that. So I'll briefly introduce the panelists, and then we'll move to a set of questions, and then we'll have a microphone circulating in the audience. We'll start with Your Excellency, Mr. Wu Hongbo, who served for 6 years until February, if I'm not mistaken, this year as Special Representative of the Chinese government for European Affairs. Before then, you served for 5 years until 2017 as the UN Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. And before then, you served as ambassador in Germany and in Manila in the Philippines. And we're really grateful to have you with us. There might be a few questions about what is going on in China, so I suggest you get prepared for that. Next to you, Elisabeth Braw. Elisabeth, you're Swedish, you live in the UK, and you're a senior fellow of the Atlantic Council, the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Your next book is, I would attempt to say it's melting down, but it's not. It's about something that is melting down, and that's called the Arctic. But it's coming very soon, and you published a book last year on the end of globalization, Goodbye Globalization, the return of a divided world. So it's quite apropos. Next to you, the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Mr. Fariz Rzayev. You've been in the position since 2020, and before that you served in the Ministry of Education, and you've moved from different offices and worked as the Vice Chief of the Secretariat of the first Vice President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, so very rich experience at the helm of the Azeri government. Next to me, a kind of traveling companion of the Bled Forum, Sunjoy Joshi, the chairman of the Observer Research Foundation, that is no less than the most important think tank in India, and I would dare say one of the most important in Asia. If I say the most important, I lose some Asian friends here, so I'll just say one of the most important in Asia. And you also are a visiting associate at the International Institute for International Studies in London, and you've spent your career at the crossroads of energy and the environment, both in private companies and the Indian Administrative Services. And last but certainly not least, Professor Klaus Dodds, who served until July, so it's still very fresh, as Professor of Geopolitics and Executive Dean of the School for Life Sciences at Holloway College at the University of London. And your new book is, actually I thought it was upcoming, but it's already out. So Could you say in 2 words what readers can expect?
Well, it'd be 3. Unfrozen, the Arctic is in trouble. 4.
Right, I'll guess we'll refer to that during the discussion. So I'd like to turn to Your Excellency, Mr. Wu. As I said, President Xi has welcomed dozens of heads of state in Beijing. We have a few of them here, as you can hear. It seems like the latest summit 2 days ago was the largest summit ever hosted in the history of the Shanghai Association. And we have seen a significant rapprochement between India, China, of course, and Russia, but also many other countries. In your view, if I take the title, is President Xi gently stirring the global order or shaking it, more frankly?
Well, you are very well informed because I was traveling, so just know as much as you do about the Tianjin meeting. However, I would like to share in my humble way some of my understandings. Indeed, that meeting has been the largest ever hosted in China by my president. Over 20 heads of states, more than 20 heads of states and governments attending, including the Indian Prime Minister. That meeting has been very useful and fruitful. There are declarations and also the results of the meeting. If somebody would like to look at it, you can refer to the internet. One thing I would like to point to the attention of the audience and other panelists. My president personally launched an initiative called Global Governance Initiative. I think what has been discussed, what has been suggested in that initiative fits well with the targets and subjects we have been discussing here. There is a concept note or paper. I would recommend if somebody is interested, they could look at the document carefully. I would like to share with you for time are rather limited, 5 key elements contained in that initiative. First, sovereign equality. Countries big and small, weak and strong should be equal. Secondly, abiding by international rule of law, not a rule of law in your country, but a rule of law internationally. Thirdly, we should uphold genuine multilateralism. Number 4, we should advocate people-centered approach. I think many people are talking about people-centered, but no real actions have been taken. Last but not least is action-oriented. This is very important. Take the climate change, for example. China was doing what it should to develop green energy capacity. However, we've been accused of overcapacity. But we believe actions are more important, much more important than paying lip service. I think this is the only 5 key elements enshrined in that initiative. I do recommend, if you are interested, to read it carefully. You may have a different understanding after that, but one thing I could say, what my president has been suggesting is not to upset the world order or regulations, to improve it and to defend the existing multilateral global governance with the United Nations as a center, with the UN Charter and the international laws and regulations as solid basis. Thank you.
Much. I'd love at a later stage to come back on what you said regarding lip service, whether we see the end of the lip service era. I mean, to some extent, there's much arguments. supporting the idea. Sunjoy, I'd wish to turn to you. There was a very interesting comment by your foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, actually commenting about the Tianjin summit regarding Europe, because Europe said, oh my goodness, what is going on? It's just the end of something. Of course, I think everyone needs to cool down here a bit. But he said, Europe has a problem, and it's about time that it stops considering that its problems are the world's problem, and it starts understanding that the world's problem also are its problem. So the question is, there has been, as everyone knows here, a trade deal that has been in discussion for some time now. The President of the European Commission traveled to meet Prime Minister Modi some months ago with the most sizable delegation thus far. What will it take for Europe to rebuild its credibility to come out as a reliable partner?
How do you like your martini, stirred or shaken?
I love them shaken, to be very honest, so don't be afraid.
But the really good martinis, are stirred, because that does not dilute the martini, retains the tastes, the original flavors of the mixtures, and goes far smoother. And since we're on the subject of Europe and we've just finished with Tianjin, there is a new martini being stirred. It's a Primakov martini. And to remind the audience, and especially give Klaus, of course, with this historical background, understands this, it was invented by Yevgeny Primakov in the 1990s. The Cold War had ended many years ago. But Russia was still not being accepted into Europe. Russia wanted to be part of Europe, but there was a resistance to it at that point of time, and that was the height of the unipolar moment, the height of unilateralism building up at that point of time. So Yevgeny Primakov at that point of time suggested that the world will change, and the power will lie within the RIC, the Russia, India, China troika, which I call the Primakov martini. Now the three don't actually mix very well. There are problems. Vodka, yes, is a good smooth drink. It's no flavor. Mixing it with Indian whiskey has got too many flavors, 28 languages. It's a very diverse country. It's a very mixed flavor. And then you add Muay Thai to it. It's a firecracker of a drink. It's lethal, pungent. How the hell do you get them together? The only way you can get the three together is, guess how? A good squeeze of tart, bitter lemon. And who provided that? Guess who did it? You know the answer. You make the whiskey, Indian whiskey, into whiskey sour with lots of tariffs, throw in 25, then add another 25, and you have the Primakov martini already. Okay? So if things are going as they're going in Tianjin, the Primakov martini may not just be the drink of the year 2025, but may turn out to be the drink of the decade. Now, how does Europe respond to this, is Europe's question. Now, how does Europe come into this? What mixtures? This is a good bar game going around in the world. That's why I love the title of this discussion. Lots of drinks are being mixed all around. I too, you too, I make lots of things, lots of mixtures happening. Now, where does Europe come into this is something for Europe to decide. That's all I'll say for the moment.
Well, I'll catch you later then. But that's, I think that gives us an idea for commercialization, so we need to have a chat with the panel. I'd like to turn to you, Deputy Foreign Minister. As we were chatting before that panel, I was commenting on the view that your president must have enjoyed riding on the train from Tianjin to Beijing when he arrived a few hours ago. It's an interesting journey record that your president has had lately in the White House, the Oval Office some weeks ago, celebrating a peace with Armenia under the leadership of President Trump. We, of course, all of us remember COP last year, and now in Beijing. When we look at the geography of your country, and Klaus knows one or two things about it. It makes it a strategic country in the new geopolitical recomposing of the world. You're close to Europe. There has been an energy partnership growing with Europe. You obviously do not share a border with the US, but the US remains an important partner. You're obviously close to both historically and geographically to Russia. And although you're not on the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, you still play an important part in the relation between Asia and Europe, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative. How does one manage with such a identity to keep partners everywhere at a time when it seems that the strong ones ask you to make a choice between them and the competitor?
Thank you. The answer is very simple and short one. We don't make choices, and we have multiple identities. It is as simple as that. Azerbaijan is a European and Asian, is Middle Eastern, is Caucasian, Caspian, Central Asian, Turkic, Muslim nation, but with a secular state, recognizing both Israel and Palestine, right, and so on and so forth, right? Our foreign and security policy from day one has always been based on international law, sovereign equality of states, and national interests. From day one of our independence, we believed strongly and continue to believe in international law without any double standards or selective approaches, and multilateralism, right? And there are very simple, basic reasons for that. Azerbaijan is a small, landlocked, post-Soviet country located in a very sensitive, volatile, and fragile part of the world. So we are trying to contribute to building up stability, security, and international peace. President Aliyev's participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit was yet another tangible demonstration of our approach to world affairs. And the timing and relevance could not be higher. You mentioned the historical accords of August 8, signed and certified at the meeting in the White House. I'm very glad to see sitting here in first row my colleague from Republic of Armenia, Deputy Minister Kostanyan, and I appreciate his interest to this panel. This probably is yet another demonstration of a new environment of peace, environment of normalization, environment of starting to treat each other not as perpetual enemies or competitors, but as neighbors, which we are. Azerbaijan indeed, and our entire region, is located at a crucial crossroad. Like it or not, but today, Azerbaijan and the Caspian is the only land/sea corridor connecting Europe to Caucasus, Caspian Basin, Central Asia, and East Asia. There are a million reasons for that. Sanctions, restrictive measures, embargoes, general global turbulence, which regretfully is not subsiding. In terms of numbers, we've seen since February 2022, for obvious reasons, the volume of international transit traffic crossing Azerbaijan's territory going up 90%. 90. It was good that for more than 10 years, by decision of President, we invested in strategic upgrade and expansion of our transit capacity. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to handle it. But there is more to come. So we need diversification of transit routes, of transportation corridors, and we believe that the historical accord signed, initialed, proclaimed back in August 8, opens a very new way for regional development, normalization, and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I want to turn to Elisabeth, but Ambassador, please comment.
I just want to add one simple point. It's a true story. During the height of COVID-19, Azerbaijan was badly in need of vaccine and medicine. They turned to Russia first, Nothing happened. Then they turned to European Union. The answer is no, we haven't got enough. Then Azerbaijan turned to China. In a matter of few days, vaccine and the medical medicines landed in their capital. And we think that the friends in need are really friends indeed. Just one point added to, maybe it's better for you to understand the relations between our two countries. And thank you very much for your president to visit China for the Tianjin meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wu.
I confirm that I myself was vaccinated with Chinese vaccine, so thank you on a personal basis.
Thank you.
I think that, again, stresses your comment, Ambassador Wu, regarding the end of lip service. I think it's, I thank you for your comment. Elisabeth, we are in the era of, to quote an Italian writer, of predators, whether one likes it or not. And we've talked a lot about whether one should go rather in the stirred option or the shaken one. But it seems that Europeans always go for the simplest option, I'd say, which means that it's the seemingly peaceful one. In other words, in an era of predators, Europeans rather feel themselves in an era of naivete, as one could say. You've advocated for quite some time now, especially looking at the successful example of Sweden, for the teaching of security in school. In other words, leading the citizens of tomorrow raise awareness that the world has changed. And it's not about seeing the others, and I quote you, Deputy Foreign Minister, as a competitor, but as a neighbor, but as it happens, that the world is made of surprises. So the question is, how can Europeans, or should they relearn the language of power? And are citizens ready for that?
I don't think you need to learn the language of power, but you need to understand, you need to learn from somebody. You need to understand how your country is set up in the world. And I was just reminded, as you were speaking, of a conversation I had with a black cab driver in London, so a taxi driver in London, just after the Brexit referendum. And as I think we all know, taxi drivers they always give you the undiluted truth. And this driver said, well, you know, it's a strange thing because we, the UK, voted to leave the European Union, but nobody actually knows how it works. And what the government or the EU should have done before the referendum or years ago, for decades, is run information snippets on television showing or explaining how various parts of the European Union work. But as it happened in 2016, the UK held this referendum without citizens actually knowing how the EU works and how the UK functions within it. That is not a good state of affairs, and it's true for so many other things, because we stop learning essentially when we leave formal education. We may educate ourselves by watching the news, reading the news, but there is no guarantee that everybody will do that, and that the news will provide you with a complete understanding of whatever the issue at hand is. And no issue can be more important than the security of our countries. And if we are going to change the way we look at security, if we're going to spend more on defense, if we're going to strengthen various alliances, if we're going to risk going to war against the country, then our citizens should know how we are set up in the world, what the world looks like, what the threats look like, what the government is able to do, and what the rest of us will have to do if on a daily basis, but also if the situation continues to deteriorate. So, for example, if power were to go down here in Bled at this moment, well, by the way, who would know what to do if power and the internet went down?
We still have martini, so I guess.
Well, you wouldn't have any ice with them, because obviously the refrigerator wouldn't work, the freezer wouldn't be working anymore. So not a single person apparently would know what to do. So I think we need education, not just for school children, but also for those of us above the age of 18, but especially for school children. And it's not to teach any kind of belligerence, it's to teach to provide knowledge about how our respective countries are set up in the world, what the threats are, what they can look like if they materialize, if they turn into real danger, real aggression against our countries. And by the way, that matters a lot because climate change is worsening, is growing, and that will cause threats of a different kind to which we need our societies to respond, not just the governments, certainly not just the armed forces, but everybody.
Thank you very much, and thank you for mentioning climate change, because this is something that almost everyone on that panel has worked on, and I'd very much like to also address that dimension. Klaus, Elisabeth just mentioned the ice quickly melting down, so I cannot refrain from asking you about the Arctic. The Arctic has become geopolitically increasingly relevant over the past decade, giving even some precedent the idea of territorial expansion, let's put it that way, looking at Europe. There seems that there has been a kind of conflict spillover when it comes to the Arctic that looked for some time, as the kind of neutral territory that could be spared any sort of conflict. So does that mean that Europe somehow, thanks to the Arctic melting down, is condemned to remain in the game? Because geographically, and you're a geographer, Europe, is an Arctic power de facto. That would be my first question. And the second, which will offer me a transition to go back to Sunjoy, the Indo-Chinese border, but perhaps the melting Arctic first.
Yeah, no, the Arctic in some ways really offers a very helpful proxy for where we were 30 years ago and where we are now. So in the 1990s, there was considerable optimism. A lot of this actually is due to the kind of vision that Mikhail Gorbachev sketched out in 1987 for the Arctic as a sort of region of peace. And the Arctic states and a couple of European Union member states are indeed Arctic states. Denmark, of course, through the Kingdom of Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and you also have associate members like Norway and Iceland. Worked really hard to build collaborative circumpolar architectures to try and actually engender better understanding, shared values, collaboration where was possible. Well, that started to go wrong, really, in about 2007-8 onwards. The warning signs were there when the Russian flag was gently deposited at the bottom of the Central Arctic Ocean. 6-7 years later, two important things happen. One is that Russia annexes Crimea, and the Arctic states face a dilemma. You want to express your displeasure at this a blatant violation of rules, norms, and values that you hold dear, but you don't want Russia to leave the Arctic Council because 50% of the Arctic is Russian. The other thing that changes remarkably quickly, in 2013, if you'd said to Russia, would you like China to become an observer to the Arctic Council, the answer would have been niet. In 2014, that changes. And really what you've seen over the last decade is the Arctic being split in two. There is now a Russian-Asian Arctic, and there is now a Euro-American Arctic, until something else happens. Donald Trump. Trump has fractured the European-American Arctic. It's very difficult to row back from the comments made over the last 6 months. You can't, you would think, go and threaten a NATO ally with annexation of a constituent part of your kingdom and think that others won't notice. So now we face the unsavory prospects of 3 Arctics. A North American Arctic that Trump thinks should include Canada and Greenland, a European Arctic, a somewhat diminished one, and one that is the one you really should watch, is the Russian, Asian, Middle Eastern Arctic. And like most things in geopolitics, if you don't follow territorial borders, follow the money, because that will often give you clues. So look out for the growing role Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, in the Russian, Asian Arctic. And then to finish off, China and India both think of themselves as tripolar states. In other words, that they have interests in the Arctic, the Himalayas, Hindu Kush, and the Antarctic. And both India and China are asking tougher questions about polar governance, and that actually mirrors what the ambassador said right at the start about asking questions about how governance works. So I think, long story short, you can pick somewhere like the Arctic and the Antarctic, and you can use that to tell a very interesting story about how global geopolitics has changed over the last 3 decades.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, if I look at it in a realistic, so somehow pessimistic way, I'd say that it's just taken the globe and reduced it, but re-implementing the geopolitical divisions in a smaller piece of land. But I'm sure that we'll come back to it. I mentioned the Indo-China border, and I would love to hear the perspective of you both and you, Ambassador. Is it something that President Trump looks as if it were his last hope to keep India and China divided? And I'd ask this. Yes, I ask you. I told you I would catch you later, so there it is.
See, India and China, as far as the border is concerned, the Indo-China border was a creation of the British. Lines drawn on the map, just like the India-Pakistan border. And India and China have had a long history. First, they had one border clash in 1962. Mind you, that was in 3,000 years, one clash. After that, there were incidents, but no major clashes until incidents happened in Galwan and other places. Now, that is, certain lines, yes, are disputed between the two. But there have been a series of confidence-building measures which both parties had agreed to from time to time. And in most of the cases, the two parties had agreed how these disputes, because yes, you can't restrain shepherds from going from one side to the other. You can't sometimes restrain petrol parties from extending themselves and seeing what is happening on each side. So those kinds of skirmishes had been happening until, Galwan happened and things started going south. But I think both countries realize, see, India and China, in spite of everything, no matter what we can talk about, what's happened to that very watered-down drink today, which is the Quandt. It tastes like a flat soda at this point of time. But India repeatedly had made it very clear that as far as India is concerned, it is not there to contain China. And the security containment of China, they made it very clear also at the Shanghai, when this happened in Singapore. That Modi went there and said, we are not here to contain China. This may be America's dream or America's fantasy. This is not our fantasy. India and China are large trading partners. India is dependent to a large extent on Chinese trade, and that trade, in spite of everything, has been growing. And it's a strong people-to-people trade. So the two, economically, yes, like many other countries of the world, have nodes of trade deep with China. So where these border relations, these border contests come in is one part of the story. The other part of the story is a different kind of relationship which has been developing between China and India, where India, in many ways, when it started imagining itself as one of the places for friend-shoring, for certain value chains which are going to be disrupted, post-COVID. And when the whole world started talking about decoupling from China, and it's interesting how the world changes. Today, instead of decoupling from China, people have started seriously thinking, including Europe. We just spoke about the Arctic. Europe, Gulf states, they all started thinking of a different kind of decoupling. How do you do strategic diversification? How do you build partners outside the region for the one simple thing? You spoke about what is the currency of power. Does each country need power? How does it build its power? Actually, the new currency of power today, see, guns, weapons, yes, that is one thing. Building arms, building security, that is one part. Investing in defense, that is one part. But in the coming future, the currency of power, more than that, is going to be resilience. And for the sake of that resilience, to be able to survive in a world which shifts constantly from year to year, you need that resilience and strategic diversification. So yes, countries like India and many others, even Europe, we can see those strands. They don't say it so openly. India openly says we are talking. They have been saying it openly for many years. We believe in strategic diversification, which they call strategic autonomy. And Europe today also talks a language of strategic autonomy. So this is the way the poles are really shifting. And so, yes, much may be made in certain quarters about the dispute with India and China across the borders. We also dispute with Pakistan. We have other disputes. We have disputes with certain, and we resolve certain disputes with Bangladesh. So we are always willing to talk and resolve these disputes. There is no issue about them. We're going to get to war about those disputes? Sorry, that's not going to happen.
You lose your lemon provider, but I'm sure you'll replace it. Ambassador Wu, Sunjoy has mentioned conflict resolution. There used to be, perhaps there still is, but I dare say there used to be an institution that will celebrate its 80th anniversary this year that was created to offer every single country on the planet for a space where conflict could be discussed and prevented, or if it was triggered, resolved. It's an organization you know well, you worked there, it's the United Nations. When we look at the inflation of the UN portfolio and everything it does, and we compare it with its initial mandate, I can't refrain but thinking about what one of its best known Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld said about the role of the UN. It's not meant to bring humanity to heaven, it's rather meant to prevent it from going to hell. Do you think it's a lost cause? The UN cause is lost, and we enter an age where, perhaps for better, we will see a more regional governance with different poles. We mentioned Tianjin. President Xi announced the creation of a new development bank committed to nearly 300 million of free aid towards the end of the year, $1.4 billion of loans and guarantees for the next 3 years. Those are quite sizable amounts, and just for China alone. Or is there an opportunity to revamp and rejuvenate the UN, and what would it call for?
Thank you very much. If I may, I would like to attend to the points raised by the previous two panelists. I think first is the strong coming back of geopolitics. That the Arctic issue has been mentioned, the melting iceberg has been mentioned, China-India border issue has been mentioned. Now, that reminds me one famous remarks made by the former Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken. He said, I think in New Munich, Germany, in international system, if you're not at a table, you're on the menu. That is notorious law of jungle. Recent events have been improving that the law of jungle are coming back to our real world with great force. Now, come about the declining alliances, that's a part of our topics. We see that the cross-Atlantic relations have been challenged greatly. When you see a big country across Atlantic is trying to mediate the war between Ukraine and Russia while keeping European Union out of the door, when you see that very power trying to collect at least 15% of the tariff from the allies while demanding zero access, tariff access for their own goods. We see the same power asking for, or even possible may annex by force, Greenland or Panama Canal. You know what is happening. The confidence, unity among the traditional allies are shattered. Now we are outside. We think, what is happening? It's 80 years way after the ending of the Second World War. In the 80 years, what have been Europeans doing for themselves? My humble view is strategic autonomy. strategic autonomy of the European Union is not only consistent with its long-term and fundamental interests, but is also prerequisite for European Union or European countries at large to get a seat at the table, to compromise, to surrender itself to superior pressure, lead you nowhere. So without the strategic autonomy, your seat at the table will not be decided by you, by somebody else. So my strong urge is European countries, European Union in particular, should be master of their own fates. Now, talking about geopolitics, I think all the wonderful efforts has been ruined. I personally, as Under-Secretary of the United Nations, involved in the drafting of SDGs. That was passed unanimously by member states in 2015. Now, only 15%, if I remember correctly, from the wordings from Secretary General are still on track. The rest is almost disappeared, including climate change. We know that big power is doing what on climate change? About the borders between China and India, that is the legacy left in history. To be more specific, by the British colonialists. We both recognize this is an issue between our two great powers, India and China. Although sometimes the border situation is up and down, but both our countries consider this is a matter between our two countries. Outside interference will be forbidden. To try to use that as leverage, either to make use of India or China, would be daydream. I think our India colleagues sitting here and me have the same confidence. Sooner or later, we'll have this problem solved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll catch you on the UN, but I think this was such an important...
If you ask me to go on,
sure.
I can do it. But I'm afraid I can spend too much time.
No, we have time. We still have time. And by the way, I have the time. It says that it hasn't started, so we have all the time in the world. Yeah.
Okay. About United Nations. First of all, I try to explain whenever I meet others discussing the United Nations. United Nations are member states led. If member states want the United Nations to do good things, the UN is going to do it. If the UN membership say, well, that is not your power, the UN will be paralyzed. So member states driven is key point to keep in mind when we talk about United Nations. They say, the Secretary General, Guterres, has been very weak. He should say much louder. But remember, behind him, big five powers. If they differ, I think the Secretary General would move forward to confront any of the permanent members of the United Nations. And United Nations system has been good and has been benefit all of us over the past 80 years. However, United Nations system has been seriously challenged. Look at the recent events. The United Nations is almost not operationable. The resolutions passed, nothing happened, no legal binding force. Even if you have a Security Council resolution passed, some countries just say we just not implement it. Throw it into the rubbish bin. First point I try to explain is we need United Nations. We need United Nations system because this is the largest intergovernmental body. If we decided to get rid of this, I think sooner or later, member states or the countries throughout the world, my goodness, we have to start a new one. Instead of starting a new one, we should keep the existing one. Secondly, the United Nations system should catch up with what is developing in the world. So which means it will need reform. We're not going to rock the boat, but we are going to repair the boat so it will sail more smoothly and faster. That's why my president put forward the global governance initiative. It's Chinese contribution. We said time and again, we support, without any reservation, the United Nations with the UN Charter and laws and regulations as a strong legal basis. What we're going to do is improve it, not throw it out like I wanted a baby. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador. It's not common these days to hear a kind of love appeal to the UN, and hearing your leadership that we need to fight to keep it afloat and improve it, all of us, all member states, so that the ship keeps sailing more smoothly, using your words. There's something you mentioned, and I'd like to, I was about to turn to you, but please, thank you.
Since you mentioned ship sailing, so the United Nations system has its problems, but there are, I think, opportunities that are materializing now for new alliances, or at least not new alliances, new cooperation, new collaboration, and specifically in the maritime domain, which really has to work, or otherwise our economies will not be able to function properly. And as we have seen, for example, well, most prominently in the Red Sea, a coalition of the willing trying to stop the attacks that hasn't worked. And we have also seen in the past when there was a major problem affecting global shipping, namely piracy, the world's nations came together to defeat piracy. And I think there's an opportunity for such collaboration again, because it's not ideological, it's just in protection of global shipping. Nobody can be against the protection of global shipping. And there's one country in particular that has a lot of seafarers, more than any other nation except the Philippines, on global ships, and that also has a growing navy, and that also has an ambitious foreign policy, namely India, that I think could be playing. There is a niche for India, not a niche. There is a space, a significant space for India to play a more significant, a more active role in maintaining the global maritime order, and that is an opportunity again for countries that may agree on little else to team up, including India, not just India, but I think there's an opportunity for India to play a leading role. And by the way, I think we all saw the incredible intervention by the Indian Navy to liberate a ship taken hostage by pirates just a few weeks ago. Seafarers from lots of countries were on that ship that had been taken hostage, and they were all rescued.
Well, thank you very much. And I think the maritime pillar is one of the three pillars of the Indo-India, Middle East, Europe corridor I was mentioning. So it's indeed a space for perhaps even greater cooperation between Europe and India. Minister, there's something that the ambassador...
Sorry to bring up the maritime domain when you're a landlocked country, but...
we have fleet, to believe it or not, and it proudly waves Azerbaijani flag in the world ocean, but not exactly in that part of the world.
There is one aspect that the ambassador mentioned, it's climate, and your country was presided over COP last year. the ambassador mentioned that with a failing US leadership on climate, it makes global effort to fight the acceleration of climate change more difficult. How do you approach this at a moment when your country, which is still exporting oil, but is investing a lot in clean tech and clean solution?
Thank you. A couple of facts which would help all of us understand better Azerbaijan's keen interest and approach to contributing to fight against the climate change. Azerbaijan is indeed a landlocked country. I keep saying that a lot. We are located on shore of a Caspian Sea, which technically is a lake. It's the biggest, the greatest lake on this planet. But do you know that in past 20 years, the sea level of the Caspian dropped down 2 meters? 1.5 meters just in past 5 years. So we are witnessing an ongoing, escalating environmental catastrophe, which would have wider global repercussions going beyond the immediate Caspian basin, touching lives of people in China, in Sweden, in Slovenia, in India, elsewhere, right? Again, the largest lake on Earth. And we already regretfully saw the tragic fate of the Aral Sea, you know, the large lake in Central Asia, which is no longer existent, right? So there is a story to that. Another thing is that Azerbaijan recently joined the Club of Space Nations, you know, launching and operating space satellites. So one of the few things we realized while using the satellite-produced imagery is that the volume of glaciers in Azerbaijani Caucasian mountains, which basically are reservoirs of natural fresh water, also diminished, you know, went down 20% in past 5 years. More or less the same story we can see in all of the neighboring countries, right? Because we are in this boat together, like it or not. So with this in mind, in early 24, late 23, early 24, Azerbaijan volunteered to chair the COP process and to host the COP29 summit. That was not an easy process to handle. We still are chairing it. But we are extremely proud of the fact that the COP29 summit in Baku in November 24 was a success story. Despite opposition by many parties, by a group of countries, by certain organizations, which were not playing nice, put it mildly, Azerbaijani chairmanship managed, with the help of like-minded partners, to achieve 3 revolutionary goals, which we refer to as the Baku breakthrough. Let me just mention them briefly. So the Baku finance goal set the new global target to channel 1.3 trillion of climate finance to developing countries by 2035. This includes a new core finance goal of 300 billion. Let me just remind those of you who are not very familiar with the COP process is that the previous target was 100 billion. 300 billion, of course, is not that a large target, but it's 3 times bigger than the previous one. Second, COP29 presidency succeeded in getting the Fund for Loss and Damage up and running and ready to distribute money already this year. Last but not least, COP29 ended the decade-long wait for conclusion of notorious Article 6 negotiations, which are dedicated to high-integrity carbon markets under the UN, right? As I mentioned, we still are chairing the COP29 process. We still have time until our chairmanship will end with a transfer of powers to our dear friends and colleagues in Brazil. Last but not least, one of the novelties which Azerbaijani chairmanship introduced is that when we assumed the chairmanship duties, we, with a great deal of surprise, realized that there is no institutional continuity, right? we in Azerbaijan chaired and hosted COP29. So there were at least 28 presidencies and summits, but there was no passing the baton, so to speak, right? There were files negotiated, but some files left open without institutional memory, institutional continuity, and so on and so forth. So one of the first initiatives of Azerbaijani presidency was to establish the COP Troika, you know, incumbent, so acting presidency, the past one, which was in charge with open files, and the incoming, the new presidency. So for the first time in COP history, we, with our friends and colleagues from United Arab Emirates and Brazil, were trying to work together. And we are very proud of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for someone who took part actively, I can confirm that the organization was quite remarkable. There is, I think I can say that, perhaps I can't, but I will say it, that we had a Russian representative on that stage. So I won't speak in the name of Russia, but I'll ask a question about Russia, and I'll turn to you, Klaus. It's actually extremely interesting to see, at least from a European standpoint, let's be honest, that in spite of much of what has happened, Russia has retained a certain appeal across the global south. It's a fact. And one could argue that putting oneself in the shoes of a global south country, it's still better to have 3 powers or 4 powers than just 2, because you can play off against have them play off against one another. But there's also one other aspect, and perhaps I'm wrong, that Russia is one of the very few countries that cannot look back on any kind of territorial dispute with any global south country. Does this help them, also in the narrative?
Well, I think the narrative that President Putin and his regime have mobilized is incredibly self-serving, but one that I think actually skillfully picks up both past, present, and future. So the first thing to bear in mind is that Russia comes out of the context of the Soviet Union. And during the Cold War, the Soviet Union had a network of relationships with countries around the global south. And an important relationship, for example, was with India during the Cold War period, but many other parts of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And one of the things that the Soviet Union did was position itself as a revolutionary state that had also borne the brunt of extraordinary violence, aka the Second World War, and come out of that espousing an ideology that owes its existence to the 1917 revolution that many countries at the time felt was quite attractive. So it doesn't surprise me that there is such a thing as global Russia in one sense or another. Secondly, there is a Russian diaspora, and one of the things that President Putin has been very skillful at doing is to say that Russia goes wherever Russians are. Thirdly, there is a geopolitical project that I don't have to, sense, overly stress, which is about restoring the Soviet Union to what it was. And Putin's been very clear about the geopolitical catastrophe that was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. I think the other thing to bear in mind is just think about where Russian oil goes, where it gets refined, where it gets consumed. There are lots of different ways that Russia makes itself felt on the global stage. And some of that we may not care for within Europe, for example. But I think the lesson to be learned from February 2022 in particular is that not everybody looks and feels the same way about the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I think that surprised many Europeans. I think it surprised many North Americans. And that is partly the clue that a lot of what we're talking about here, which is a kind of a fracturing, but also a great opportunity for a country in particular like China that has always seen itself as a civilizational power to step into a vacuum that appears to be emerging. The final thing I would just remind you about is the Bled Forum, I think, has its 20th anniversary this year, if memory serves. Well, in 2005, the international lawyer Philippe Sands published a book called Lawless World. And the focus of that book was not Russia, it was not China, it was the United States and its allies fighting the war on terror. And one of the things I think as Europeans, and I'll include myself in this if you don't mind, is we are so terribly quick to forget both recent and not so recent history. And I speak to you as a country that is and remains, in some sense or another, an imperial power. You only have to look at the 14 overseas territories we still hold to this day. Others understand that. So I think one of the things that Europeans have been remarkably poor at is understanding how the rest of the world regards them. And so a lot of what I think is going on is Russia, China, India, and the United States, in a very quixotic sort of way, actually reimagining the world as one that is both multipolar on the one hand, picking and choosing the bits of global governance it cares for, but also being very clear that they have specific spheres of influence. And one of the things we as Europeans are learning is that we're not an ally to the United States. We are expected to be a vassal. We are expected to do as we are told. And that was the message to Denmark. We need to prepare ourselves for this. And by the way, 25 years ago, we still would have talked about normative Europe. We would have had this great confidence that the EU was going to be a civilizational power. I think yesterday afternoon, there was some really sensible commentary around the geopolitical naivety being over. We are being put in our place.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I'm sure there will be comments on that, so please.
So I'm trying to provoke the panel members.
Yes, thank you, and then we'll open up to the floor.
And also,
a quick comment. You may have a longer comment, Ambassador. But one thing that I've learned in many years of this work, but also of being a human being, is that we experience any situation differently. So you and I, Grégoire, you and I will, after we walk out here, you will have one view on how the panel went and what was said, and I will have a different view, even though it was the same panel. And I remember before my husband and I got married, which was many years ago, you know, you have to have these conversations with the priest. So we had the conversations with the priest, and he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, my wife and I have been married for 37.5 years, but in reality that's 75 years, because I've experienced these 37.5 years my way, and she has experienced them a completely different way. And the same thing is true for countries.
Thank you. Ambassador.
2 quick points. Number 1. Why Global South is not very confident about what USA and the European Union are doing. And again, the key word, double standard. When the United States invaded without authorization of the United Nations for the second time into Iraq, what happened? Now, when Russian troops enter into Ukraine, what happened? If you compare the two, you see the difference. Many Global South people say, hey, better stay away with those folks. Maybe one day they will apply the same double standards on you. That's key point for consideration. Second, about the Global South. Maybe Russia has been inheriting the former Soviet Union, the legacies, for being nicely with the developing countries. But what I would like to say, European Union and Europe at large should re-look at the world map. The Global South, its total GDP volume surpassed that of developed countries in 2023. Now it's almost count half of the world GDP. And the BRIC countries have contributed more than 50% of the world economic growth. They are not the old poor folks. I urge the European leaders and the politicians and all the people to have a fresh mind and look at these emerging countries, to discard all the old ideas about these poor neighbors or nephews and nieces. You could start a general cooperation with them. That also will counterset some high pressure from one superpower. I think there's a way out. In addition to that, I would refer to existing partnership. That is not a new one. China, European Union. I think this is a very interesting topic. We have been with each other after established diplomatic relations good 50 years. In 2003, we make official announcement that China and European Union are comprehensive strategic partners. And we have been doing very well. Nowadays, the two-way trade per day is $1 billion, $2 billion. Huge. However, recently we find the situation is not that good, because on top of the comprehensive strategic partnership, European Union has put restrictions. China is cooperator, is competitor, and systemic rival. It's really confusing. If I'm sitting here, I'm your friend, I'm a collaborator, at the same time, I'm your enemy. How would you differentiate me? One German friend told me, that is not China policy. It's a basket of confusing and contradicting views. So we see that as really stumbling block in our further development, which is very important under today's circumstances, both China and the European Union. To blame China for what the European Union the problem the European Union have in developing its own economy won't lead us anywhere. To treat China as systemic rival would not solve Europeans' problems. So we consider, we have been very consistent. European Union is China's comprehensive strategic partner. We never change our position. We do hope the European Union will fresh look at their position. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think there's been a lot about the concept of perceptions in this new geopolitical cocktail. Sometimes you think it's bitter and it's sweet. Sometimes you think it's sweet and it's bitter. So best thing is to taste. We have 10 minutes, I guess, in spite of what this tells me we have 1 hour and 15 minutes. I'd like to have a microphone circulate. 5 minutes, and I need to finish on time, it says, otherwise they'll chop my head off. So please, sir, if there's no microphone, then I'll just listen to you and repeat the question.
Good, yeah. Everyone can hear me, I guess. My name is Jonas Kaiser from the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I wanted to address the question to His Excellency, Mr. Roos, because you mentioned the Global Governance Initiative of your President. Thank you so much. And you mentioned also the principles, and I also briefly looked it up on the internet. So I also agree, in these days we need new initiatives, and I think there are 4 now by your president, on global governance, global security, development, and civilization.
Short question, I'm so sorry to press you, but we only have 5 minutes.
We have a little time. So you talked about the first principle being sovereign equality of nations, but then you also emphasized the people-centered global governance. So how do you reconcile these 2 dimensions? Because sovereign equality, it's non-interference in internal affairs, and then people-centered, somebody needs to define what is people-centered, and is it the states who define it, or
is it somebody else? So that would be interesting to understand. And then my second question...
I think the first one will...
Sorry,
yeah.
Could you repeat your question? Which is contradicting?
The relationship between sovereign equality of nations and the people-centeredness of the global governance.
I don't see there's any problem.
Okay, you can explain to me. And then the question would be also on the initiative and how it relates to ending the war in Ukraine, because you also talked about the relationship to the EU, and I believe for Europe the crucial issue is to somehow end the war in a way that is aligned with the UN Charter.
Question,
and
please, sir. We really have 2 minutes. What's your question?
What role do you play in this?
Just put the question mark.
Yeah. What role is China playing in this?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's the question you didn't want to have at the end of the panel.
I think I've already answered that, because the sovereignty, the equality of sovereignty does not adversely affect the people-centered approach. That's why China has pulled out 400 million people from poverty in 40 years. And with the 10 years, we tackled the very last, the most difficult 100 million. The question is about how to end the Russian and Ukraine war. That is a question everybody wants to know. Even the United States President Donald Trump is trying to lead the way. Some others are reluctant to follow. And the question is, we find some difficulties. China is the first country to say there should be a negotiated settlement of the conflict. We have never changed that. As a special representative of Chinese government on the European affairs, I traveled everywhere and explained our policies. The response has been very, very negative. You are very soft on Russia, and you're trying to surrender, or you stand by the side of Russians. So we are being criticized for pushing forward the peaceful settlement through diplomatic channel. When Donald Trump said that, hey, we should sit down, have discussions, negotiate resolution, our European friends, hey, it's a good idea. So we could follow them. The question is, how much land Ukraine should keep? So their focus changed. They also forgot. They are very quick to forget. They were accusing China for the same thing. So having said all that, China will do whatever we can to help the international community to end the war, end the bloodshed as early as possible. However, one thing we should keep in mind, China is not a party to the conflict. We are far away. So to blame China for delay of finding solutions to the question is totally wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think you stressed once again the need to work on perceptions, double standards, and consistency of messaging and deeds and actions. I would wish to protract that conversation, but we're running out of time, and I'd like to keep my head and be invited back again next year. So on that, I would ask everyone to really give a big hand to our wonderful panelists. And thank you all those who followed the live stream. Thank you very much.